Hello guys, today I want to show you one Filament plugin called Kaido Kit Starter Kit. So for the last month I've been busy shooting videos on Laravel 12 starter kits. Now it's time to show something for Filament starter kit. And this comes from Putra Prima, developer from Indonesia, which is basically Filament installation including a lot of plugins pre-installed, pre-configured and optimized, customized according to the ideas of that developer. So I would call that starter kit pretty opinionated, as the author says himself too, but in a way isn't every starter kit opinionated based on the opinions of the authors? But let's take a look what's inside. After installing that, I see this. So you can manage settings, for example. Profile is a bit more cool than the default Filament. Then there's Filament Shield installed for roles and permissions. Then there's one sample CRUD with export and import. Also you can manage themes here, so you can change the appearance. And this is mostly based on additional plugins in addition to Filament. And you can see most of those features in the official GitHub, and this is the list, so developer experience with stubs, customized, and here's the list of plugins pre-installed. Now with installation, I have some criticism to the documentation because this quick start doesn't actually work. And this is such a typical scenario for plugin developers or any open source developers. They're focused on the features. They write the first version of the docs, but then they forget to update the docs. Or they are so focused on their setup for the docs that they don't think about other developers, that those developers may have different operating system, different settings and stuff like that. So while I was installing Kaido Kit, here's the log in my terminal. I do composer create project into the folder, and then after installation the Filament and the plugins, it immediately asked me the database does not exist on MySQL connection. Would you like to create that database? And no, I wanted to use a different database. So I created no, then it threw an error, and then that's it, it was over. And the documentation says that I need to configure the database later, but it actually asks me for the database during the installation. So there's a mismatch with the docs. And then also the documentation says to run composer install after composer create project, which is a bit illogical, but I tried to do that, and of course nothing to install because that was already done in the first step. And then there's copy in the example, but it was also already done behind the scenes during the installation, so I had to edit the .env file manually. And also npm install, I did run npm install, but then where's npm run dev or npm run build? And the author assumes that I would run composer run dev, but I don't want to use localhost 800 or PHP artisan serve. I'm using Laravel herd. So I would at least mention in the docs the option of npm run dev or npm run build. And then to configure, for example, Google sign-in, this is optional, but then configure resend, this is optional, but it overrides the default values in .env from Laravel skeleton. And this part I didn't like. So this is new things in addition to Laravel skeleton, and this is overriding. So by default Laravel has log, which is cool because that would work even if I don't want to send actual emails. And this starter kit assumes that I do want to use resend specifically, so I would probably leave that part in the docs but still leave the default mail mailer log in the code. And then that's not the final step. You need to configure the roles and permissions, and that part I was surprised that it was not in the default installation. So we need to run specific command to generate shield roles and permissions, which I did here, shield generate all. It just asked for the panel, but everything else was default. It didn't ask me for anything else. So I guess that part should be somehow managed inside of the installation and not separately. Super admin, yeah, that could be a separate thing, so you choose the admin user, which one do you want to grant permissions for. So then when I overcame all those installation issues, I landed here in the Kaido Kit. And I want to emphasize Composer JSON here. You can take a look at more features, but look at the amount of plugins. So we have Spotty Media Library, Laravel settings to manage this menu item of settings. So there's Filament plugin on top of Spotty plugin, same here. Then there's plugin for themes, then there's Breezy plugin to manage profile, then there's Filament XL, then there's Filament API service, and then there's Filament Impersonate. I didn't mention generating the APIs, I haven't actually tried it, but this is powered by the plugin Filament API service. So that's the plugin. You can read the docs separately about that plugin and how to generate your API. So another thing to take a look at is admin panel provider, and there's get plugins private function listing all those plugins with their default values when needed. So basically Kaido Kit is a tool that can help you to install Filament with a bunch of plugins already if you don't want to install them and configure them manually one by one. And that's cool if that set of plugins is your choice, the same as the author's. But in my personal opinion, I would personally prefer to install them manually one by one and choose what I want to install instead of this bunch of pre-configured things. But this is my personal opinion. Also want to emphasize that this repository is not a plugin, it's a full application. So you can see app folder, resources, routes. So you install Kaido Kit as a starter kit, starter project, and not as a plugin, which means that this source contains Laravel and Filament code at the time of installation. So that kit was recently updated to Laravel 12. Here's the commit, which means that the author of Kaido Kit needs to be actively upgrading that starter kit to latest versions of plugins, Laravel, Filament, and stuff like that. They actually have the same problem with Laravel starter kits, React, Vue, and Livewire. They need to update all those starter kits with the changes in Laravel framework or in Laravel skeleton as well. And this may be another problem with that starter kit. It may be not updated to some new feature of Filament or Laravel or some plugin that you want to use. Then you need to, of course, upgrade manually, and of course it is possible, but just something to consider. As well as Filament stubs. So this project, the starter kit, publishes the stubs of Filament. So there's a folder on the left, and in the documentation in the first line it says quick CRUD generation with customized stubs, which means that the tables and the forms look or may look a bit differently from default Filament. And I haven't found in the documentation what is the actual difference, so I cannot really compare. And again, what if Filament core changes their internal stubs? Then you may not have that feature in your Filament panel based on Kaido Kit. So what I'm saying here, a bit of a criticism, but more like reality check. You need to be trusting that starter kit, any starter kit, if you want to go that route and use it as a core of your application. But if you do like what Putra Prima has built here, quite a few stars here in the plugins section, and even more stars here on GitHub, 200, so people seem to like it, and you can check that out as well. I will put a link in the description below. That's it for this time, and see you guys in other videos.